You're on.
Okay. Okay, well, the first part of our presentation is going to be a little different than the last part just because first part was recorded a little differently. I guess not recorded. So we're going to give you guys the benefit of the slides here at the beginning part. All right, so Jesus asked us, who do you say that I am? So Jesus asked, at least actually he asked his disciples. He asked his disciples, who do you say that I am? And they had a lot of different ideas. They talked about him possibly being John the Baptist, possibly Elijah. And of course, Peter himself tells Jesus, saying, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. All right. And now, it's interesting, right? Because Matthew spends, a lot of space. He spends a lot of space highlighting that Jesus and the others were kind of sharing their understanding. They're sharing their understanding of who he is. And also, it's interesting that Jesus responds by telling Simon Peter who he is. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And so there's a lot of like, this is who you are kind of things going on in this part of Matthew. So the thing is that Jesus does understand that we conclude how other people view us. Like they answer the question, who am I, for us? And, we could ask the question of others, who do you say that I am? Now, when we choose to adopt the who from others, how is that going to set us up for a healthy connection with God? How are we connected in a healthy way to ourselves and to others? To what extent do we know who we are, and to what extent do we allow others to tell us who we are? And so to kind of give an example of this, there's like a whole bunch of different who's that I have here for my wife. She's my wife. She's a member of the community in Knoxville. She's the mother to my children. She's a daughter of God. She's a grandmother to my grandkids. She's a deacon's wife to the church. She's a daughter-in-law to my parents. And she's a sister to her siblings there. So there's a lot of different who's like that I would answer when I say, who is my wife? This is who my wife is. But within each of these who's, there's like a role. So it's kind of this big multiplier. So she's a spiritual companion for me. She's kind of a home maintenance buddy. So whenever things go wrong at home, we kind of work on it together. Right now we're working on our washing machine. We have, we work together on finances, and she's a resource manager. Make sure she tracks all the different resources flowing through our home. She's my support system. So, for example, she reviewed some of these slides here, and she was wondering why in the world I would have her in this slide here or in this presentation. And I was just thinking it was just easier for me to talk about the things that I say when I say this is who other people are. And the question then becomes, within all these different who's, if other people are able to tell you who you are, can you answer the question, am I behaving with virtue? So if I'm not able to meet the expectations of other people, am I behaving with virtue? Is it okay to let so many people down, for example? If I let all these different people down, does that mean I'm not behaving with virtue? And now we kind of get close to where we turned on the recording here. We have there's this idea that your imagination is really unlimited. So other people have this ability, this opportunity to define who you are and all the different expectations, but that's all based on their unlimited imagination. And unfortunately, you kind of have to operate based on your constrained reality. And it's just kind of interesting that the whole discussion about when we started the recording was right in the middle of this unlimited imagination versus reality. So sometimes the reality is really hard for us to get an actual recording to go the way we want it to. And then I guess we'll pick up the actual presentation from here. So there's a part of us that helps us answer the question, am I behaving with virtue? And that part is what I call the assessor. And so it's when that assessor kind of looks inward, it can know the content of your heart. so it has the opportunity to take into consideration your intent, like what's driving you. Am I being driven out of kindness? Am I being driven out of generosity? Or is it I'm being driven out of, self-seeking, pride and stuff like that? What's going on with me? What's making me want to do what I'm doing? So for example, let's say that, you go out here into the parking lot and you see a toddler wandering out to where cars are normally driving, right? And you just start screaming at the kid to get out of the way of any potential cars that might be coming by, right? Well, you'll know from looking inside, like, what's driving me to want to do that? Is it the well-being of the child? Or is it you just really enjoy screaming at people? What's driving you in that? And so that assessor can kind of help you decide, am I behaving with virtue? That's the idea there. So something that I want to bring up is because sometimes people have internally focused assessors and sometimes they have externally focused assessors. And there's a big difference in a person's life if it's internal versus external. So when the assessor is looking inward, right, it has access. It has access to what your intentions are and what's driving you, right? It knows what your motivations are. An externally focused assessor relies on other people, right, to let you answer the question, am I behaving with virtue? So for example, we could say, well, Gene, you don't even care about this presentation. You don't even bother to push record, all those kind of things, right? And so that would be, and if Gene had an externally focused assessor, he'd be like, wow, I guess I really am a bad person. I guess I really don't care about what other people are doing for me, right? And so that's the danger of this, of an externally focused assessor. And of course, if you're letting other people tell you, if you're behaving with virtue or not, they've got their own issues too, right? They've got whatever it is going on with them. They may have just had a terrible day. Who knows what happened? They may have got the worst news ever in their life. And of course they could come off, in a bad way in that situation. And so if we're relying on them, people outside of us, to tell us if we are behaving with virtue, it can be very distressing. It can be very anxiety provoking, because there's a level that you just can't control. Like, you can't control what people are going to say, but you can try. Some people try, like the Dickens, to please everybody and make sure that everybody tells them that they're being okay. Do you guys have experience with any of this? You kind of what I'm talking about?
Usually you run into it in the workforce. I think that's when you have a whole lot of different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And you have attention seekers that wear you out. And then
That's the thing, is like, a lot of times you don't get to choose your coworkers, right?
that's correct.
And especially if you become a manager or something like that, then you really lose a lot of flexibility into where you can go and who you can choose to interact with. I don't know, how about you? What do you guys, I guess, what's your experience? Do you have this idea of letting other people tell you how you're doing?
And I think more of, going into the work situation, like you're saying, is I think of performance appraisal time, where you as
Performance
a manager,
appraisal, yeah.
where you as a manager appraise the
Manager
employee,
tells you,
and the employee also has their own, appraisal of themselves, and then the two, a lot of times, may not agree. So, it's a way. That's a very difficult situation, actually, because especially when the employee doesn't agree with what you say.
As the manager, when the manager has an assessment of their performance,
Right.
and then there's like, oh, I'm not so sure that's right. And so, how do different people react to that, right? You got some
And then
people
how
like,
you
well,
rank, how you would rank yourself versus your manager ranking yourself, and
yeah.
that can really be a touchy situation.
And then one of the things about your job is that rarely does the manager have full visibility to what you do. right? Because otherwise they would be spending the same amount of time that you're working, they'd just be spending all that time just watching you, but they have other things to do. So necessarily they're limited, they're running on limited information. But still, some people, whenever they get their assessment, they go, wow, I thought I was doing okay, but I guess I'm not. How often have you heard that?
Situation one time where I assessed an employee, and we ranked like from 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. And so, but there's also a quota system. You can't have everybody as a 5, so you have to somehow, go from there. And one employee came back to me and said, I deserve to be a 5.
Hmm.
And he was insistent that he should be a 5. And I said, well, we brought this whole system to the director, and they agreed. Once the director agrees, that's his word. I said, you can complain to him. And since then, he's unfriended me.
Yeah. So and the thing is, the question would be like, for yourself, you can, how do you want to decide? Is him unfriending essentially saying that you're not behaving with virtue? Right? Some people might choose to do that. They might say, well, since he isn't happy with me, that must mean I'm doing something bad. And that could be a real stress invoking thing, right? Because it's like, you're totally out of control. It's just going to be what other people say about you.
But you have to remember, everybody leaves their house in the morning fighting some kind of battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you just need to learn how to not bring that into the workplace, or if you've had a bad day at work, bringing that home.
That can be pretty difficult.
It is difficult.
Yeah. Let's say like you guys at the end of this say, that's the worst presentation I've ever had. I'm about to go give a homily here at 11:30. I'll be kind of low. It's so hard, right? All right. Anything else about this kind of stuff? We're going to talk about this a little bit more. There's another aspect that gets brought into this, and that's the informer. So the informer, it works with the assessor. And so it's informer's job to give information to the assessor that it thinks the assessor needs to make a full and complete judgment. And the informer, all it's doing is it's just picking and choosing what kind of things to tell the assessor. And the informer can also be like this internally focused or externally focused entity. So for example, going back to the parking lot example, when you're yelling or screaming at this toddler, people might come up afterwards and say, that's totally inappropriate. You do not need to be yelling and screaming at the toddler. Well, the assessor might be saying, oh, I was just trying to help this kid stay alive. I mean, it's terrible for a kid to get, crushed in the parking lot. But the informer can say they did not receive whatever it was you were doing very well. And that just kind of share that as information. So the assessor can then say, well, okay, we need to just keep in mind that while we are in fact doing something that we think is good, and maybe maybe we'll continue depending on what we decide, but we need to understand that other people are not receiving things the way we think that we wanted them to. We're not maybe we're can make some changes, but still it doesn't necessarily mean that the informer has the capacity to make you feel bad about like saying you're not behaving with virtue. It's just providing data. And so the way the informer and the assessor interact with each other has a lot of different effects on people. So ideally, you would have an internally focused assessor where you kind of, when you're deciding like, am I behaving with virtue, that internally focused assessor is knowing your intent, knowing like out of what are you behaving, what's going on with you. And you would want an externally focused informer because you'd want the outside information to come in, but it would come in just as data and not as a judgment on what's going on. Is that making sense, Gene?
I was paying attention over here.
Okay, you gotta. Gene is busy running the camera. Okay. Yeah, anyway, how about I'll ask you guys, does that make sense, or what you're
That
hearing?
would be very
Yeah, to have,
helpful.
that would be a helpful combination,
Yes.
right? That's a helpful combination. But it doesn't always work like that for people. We have things that sometimes get out of whack, and they get problematic combinations. So an externally focused assessor with an externally focused informer, okay? That's essentially kind of, you have a loss of self in there. And I think exactly what you said. You have the depression going on, all the anxiety, hopelessness, right? That's what that can bring on, is when it's just the outside world that's answering the question for you. Am I behaving with virtue? You're not even considering where this stuff is coming from inside of you. That's going to be a really rough life to live. And so whenever I see people like that, it's very sad. The intention is to try to get people, because there are quite a few people that do work like this. They are essentially letting other people tell them whether or not they're behaving with virtue. And they just really work very, very hard to try to make everybody happy. Because the worst thing in the world is to get feedback that says you're not behaving with virtue. It's just a terrible, crushing experience. You have an internally focused assessor with an internally focused informer, and that is kind of where you get people that are very self-centered, very narcissistic, and that's a really hard thing to ever get that thing to turn around, because even if you were telling them, hey, things aren't, this isn't working for you, they're still so internally focused that it's really hard to get through to a person that has that. When everything is inwardly focused, it is so hard to work with a person where they might be able to see things differently. And so that's a sad thing. And
You may as well not even bother.
if you have a straight up narcissist in your life, it's really hard on the people around them. And narcissism is not nearly as common as the ways you might think. In terms, like the way people talk about it, it's like everybody's a narcissist sometimes. But the thing is, it's a very rare thing, but it can happen.
Could you just give an example? So it's like a husband who's focused on himself, and his wife just supports that? Or are you talking about different people when you say assessor and informer?
So these are all parts within yourself.
Oh, within ourselves.
Yeah. So your assessor is a part of you, and it's helping you answer the question: am I behaving with virtue?
Okay.
And the informer is giving the data to the assessor. That's another part of you, who you are.
These people live in us.
These, it's parts of you. Yeah, it's a part of. Yeah, we kind of have a bunch of different parts running around there and they kind of make it easier for us to be able to function. Because you don't have there's not one part of us that's running around doing all these different things all at once. We have a lot of parts of us that are working together at the same time. And sometimes you'll kind of feel stress inside of you because you're wanting to do this or that, and you kind of feel the parts of us kind of pulling us in different directions. And so, these are just two of the many parts that we have. There's a part of us that's called the protector, and it's like looking out for threats all the time. Is always, whatever it views as threats. You come into a room they haven't seen before, okay? And some people can have a protector that's just crazy on fire, always working really intensely, always looking around, like you hear a little sound down the hall, you're just on alert all the time. That can be kind of a sad way to live. But these are just two different parts of who we are. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make any sense to people? Yeah. All right. An externally focused assessor with an internally focused informer. I would say that this is probably the most common problematic combination that I see. And there's just going to be a whole lot of anxiety because it's the outside world that's dominating the question, who do you say that I am? And am I behaving with virtue? Are you behaving with virtue within that who they say you are? All right. So the question, who does God say that you are, right? Well, we're baptized Christians, and I'd say that we are adopted sons of God, or adopted children of God. I guess is a different way to say that same thing. And so, our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. We're followers of Jesus and members of the body of Christ, the church. Those would be kind of the roles that we play. Who do you guys, like, whenever you think about this question and God answering the question, like if you were to ask God, who do you say that I am? What would that be like for you guys? How would you answer that question?
What is it? What God will
Well, yeah,
say
like
to
if you were
us?
to ask God himself, who do you say that I am? How do you suppose he would respond to that?
My child, my loved,
What was that last part?
say my loved one.
Oh, there you go. Loved one. Very nice. Yeah.
I think I'm just children of God.
Mhm.
He's the Father.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're all, and we're his children. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of answers the who of who we are, right? And so within each of these roles, right, as a follower of Jesus, Jesus kind of shows us the way, living a life of, sacrifice, service to others, that type of stuff, trying to live a holy life, and Jesus, of course, himself had his own self-care and all of that. Like he took care of himself as well as taking care of others. And so, just following Jesus is a part of being a child of God and then being a member of the body of Christ, the church. So that means that we are in community working with each other. We're playing a role that we have to play in that, So here's the question is like trust in God, right? Because it's very easy to say we trust in God, right? I mean, I don't think any one of you would say, I don't really trust God. If I say, well, how much trust would you give God? Oh, it'd be off the charts. That's usually how it is every time, right? However, do you really trust that God's going to give you the graces that you need? Do you really trust that? See where I'm going with this. A part of this, God has created us and we have limitations. When I came in here, I wasn't sure I was going to get this screen up and running, but I can take tangents so quickly that if I don't have something to anchor me, I will be lost. I will be talking about stuff over here and I'm before you even get why I even started this presentation. So I get lost very, very easily. So I need something. To keep me on track. And so that's why I have this. So when I come in here, like in the past, I would be very, very, very wound up. And so I've kind of come to the place where it's like, well, if it was really important, God would make it be, he would make the screen work and all that kind of stuff. But if it's not important, or if he wants it to go, he wants this presentation to go without screen support, that's what's going to happen. I ended up being okay. I'm okay with it, right? I'd be okay if I had to just go without it. But that takes a lot of like being okay with things not going your way, and being okay with just assuming that whatever kind of graces God's going to give you is going to be sufficient. So what do you think about living life like that?
How else is there to do it?
Oh, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've tried every one of them probably. I mean, you could really insist on your way. Yeah, go ahead.
I think when something is not going kosher in your life, I've tried and I've just started this. What is it I'm supposed to learn? You can't control other people or how they're reacting. So maybe there's something I should be learning.
Yeah.
But I always hear people say, well, God told me to do this and that. I've never.
God doesn't work with you like that.
No.
And it's like, why not?
Guessing and trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, we have just limitations, right? So, a person could imagine that, they're just always like slicing the day up into 15-minute segments and they're doing something productive every 15 seconds. Have you ever heard of like people being efficient? I'm so efficient, I get all this stuff done, right? And to me, I just hear I'm miserable, but that's not me. I would love to be able to, come home from work and work on presentations or something, but it's like, no, I just need to sit here and waste some time. So we need rest. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. And also, there's activities that others would want us to do that we might find unpleasant. We might find them as being very unpleasant or really uncomfortable and not fun. So it could be that we just say, well, God just didn't make me to be the kind of person that would be comfortable doing that. So I'm not going to do it because I just really don't have the graces I need to tolerate that.
Yeah, but that revolves around the circumstances involved too. For instance, I would not particularly want to get a job as a caretaker. But when your spouse needs you, you don't have a lot of choice. If you're going to be in the caretaker role, whether you like it or not.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And so with some of these, and so the question would be like, do you trust God to give you the graces you need? Like, you have a spouse, God has known for a long time that you're going to be in this situation. So do you trust God to give you the grace that you need to tolerate the situation when you really have no choice?
Well, what other choice do you have but to trust God?
People sometimes divorce, right? That would be one option.
No, that's not an option.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, sometimes whenever spouses go south, sometimes it's, mental problems are severe.
Yeah.
And so then sometimes it might not be safe for you to be physically present with this person, right? And so then it's like, then you might have to do something to separate yourself, right?
Well, there's also situations where the care that's required is really beyond you.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In which case you have to make a difficult decision to either put them into a situation where they can be cared for, which may bring financial stress and all sorts of other problems. So it's a puzzlement, and if you don't trust in God under those circumstances, you're going to be in deep doo-doo, period.
It'll be unpleasant, yeah. And you go back to your assessor at that point. Am I behaving with virtue when I put my spouse into a nursing home? Right? And that's kind of like, and if you let other people outside of you, like, Dad, you can't do that, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. Then you might be thinking, wow, I'm really being a bad person. When like, no, I'm trying to make sure that this person is actually getting the care that they need. And I am now 100% certain I am I'm out of my depth. Those are the kind of things that can give people stress if they have their assessor kind of focused in the wrong direction. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But yeah, I think, trusting in God can be actually a lot harder than it sounds sometimes. Yeah.
You have to keep reminding yourself, for sure.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't like looking like a goofball or looking like I'm unprepared or something, coming in and just looking like I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, and I guess to me, it's like it tells like other people, like, how much do I care about you and your time, right? If I just came in here and started winging stuff, then you'd be like, this is just a bunch of incoherent stuff and we're really wasting everybody's time. So, I would truly feel bad about that. So I don't want to do that. So then if I go in and do a prepared presentation, but then look like a goofball, then I, fear that I'm going to be judged the way I would as if I was just winging it. You know what I'm saying? So I have a lot of those kind of things, but I've been kind of unwinding that from me, where it's like, I will do everything I can to prepare the best I can for this presentation or this homily or whatever. And then at that point, it's going to be what it is. And I'll be okay with it. That's what I tell I practice that. I'll just say that. I practice that. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean,
But don't you find then, if somebody doesn't like it, your feelings aren't quite as hurt because
Right.
you've done the best you could do.
and it's like, if it was that important, God would have done something to make it so that it would have been, it would have been better, right? If it was that important, God would have done something to fix it. If anything, changing the sound system to say different words than what I'm saying, right? Anyway, And I guess to some degree, if someone has a complaint, it's important to listen to it because you might be learning. That might be something that that might be a way for people to learn. All right. So we all have ways of responding to the requests that other people make. And one of them is a fear-driven response, right? So if we respond in fear, we're not letting our yes be our yes and our no be our no. Instead, we might say yes when we really want to say no. And we might say, and so the thing is, we're just obeying. We're not really saying yes or no to anything. We're simply obeying and doing, essentially what we translate. This request comes in, we would translate that into a demand. And it's kind of this loss of self scenario, right? So if someone comes up to you and places, a demand on you, and you do it, then who you are is really not in the equation anymore. It's essentially you're trying to be a different person than who you are. You're trying to be this person that is accepted, I guess, by the other person, would be an example. Yeah, so that's why it's a loss of self. And so, for example, if we were all shopping at the grocery store in the produce section, and the SWAT team comes in and yells at us to get down, because they have an active shooter. Well, I'm going to get down. You guys might say, no, I don't want to get down, but I'm going to get on the floor, even though that is not the place I want to be. I don't want to be on the floor in the produce section, but I'm going to say yes to their demand because I want to obey, and it's just out of fear of whatever bullets are starting to fly around. I don't want them to go through me. And so that's an example of a loss of self, because like the SWAT team guy isn't like, who are you? And, is it okay if we like, that's not going to be, they don't care, about the who of who you are. They just like, you're a carbon unit that's in the way and I need you to get down. Does that make sense? Gene,
yeah.
Those puzzles.
But you said it's fear driven.
When you obey, yes, when you obey other people, there's a lot of different ways to respond to people. Yeah. Sometimes you will say yes when you want to say no, and if it is based on fear, if it's out of fear, then it would be an obey thing.
Well, what am I afraid of if I say no? Disappointing them?
The SWAT team?
No, I'm talking about just an ordinary circumstance.
What would you be afraid of?
Well, say for instance, somebody comes along and says, I want you to be a Eucharistic minister this weekend. And you're saying, I really don't want to be a Eucharistic minister.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Yeah. Now, you say no because you're afraid to disappoint them? I mean, there's no fear. I'm not afraid of this guy.
Okay, let's say that you said, what would drive you to say yes when you wanted to say no?
A feeling of obligation.
Okay, and so that would be like, that might. Well, let's just say that you're afraid that Father Doug will see you saying no and then think you're somehow a super unholy person, and that really bothers you. That would be an example.
Uh-huh. It wouldn't bother me, but that's
right. So just imagine this world where there's some people that don't have the internal strength to say no to other people. They'll say yes to no matter what you ask of them, almost.
Well, who besides you knows what your capacity is? I mean, you've really got to make those judgments all the time.
Okay. I mean, does anyone experience the idea of saying yes when you wanted to say no?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
in Gene's scenario, you would say yes when you really didn't want to do it if you knew they were shorthanded.
No, I'm talking about like you're scared for your own well-being is what I'm talking about. That's what the obey is about. Mm-hmm. The fear-driven response is you say yes when you want to say no out of fear that something bad is going to happen to you.
Okay.
So you guys this does not ring a bell with you guys at all. Mm-hmm. This is awesome.
I can't recall it.
That's amazing.
The case for them.
Amnesia.
Well, I guess we don't live in fear of
disappointing other people.
Disappointing,
yeah.
And I'm sure there are people around like that.
Amen to that, brother. I'll tell you that right now. Yes, there are people around that do that. And there's another way. This sounds like people have gotten themselves, at least all of you guys, at least at this point, right? self-assurance. You say yes when you want to say yes, and you say no when you want to say no. That is another way of responding. And so you're not responding out of fear in this case.
I think sometimes when you say no, I feel like sometimes, depending on what it is, I have to explain to you why I don't want to do something.
You want to justify it in their mind.
Right. So if someone, like in James' case, wanted me to be a Eucharistic minister, I would say, no, I really don't feel qualified. I know you train, but it scares me to do that. Something like that.
Okay. So you want
and I
them
don't
to
wanna
affirm
disappoint-
you in your refusal, I
Right,
guess.
I don't want to disappoint God, or I don't want to drop the host, or it's like it would scare me, kind of thing. So I mean, I would explain it maybe that way.
Gotcha. All
Because
right.
I've been also asked to be a sponsor at RCIA, and I'm like, I don't feel qualified. I mean, that may sound awful, but I just don't feel qualified to do that, and that's too much of a responsibility on those people for me
Yeah, and if you felt an
to be
internal pull,
responsible for their life.
Yeah.
Too much.
if you felt an internal pull to do that, but at the same time had the intellectual thought you're not qualified, then you go back to asking, like, do I trust God and all this kind of stuff, right? That would be kind of that kind of trusting God thing. But yeah, I would just encourage you to it's whenever you say no to someone, they haven't requested you and you say no, when you justify to them your answer, it's pretty much guaranteed they're not going to understand what you're saying. And so it's okay to say no to someone that asks something of you, and you don't have to justify it to them. Because since they're not going, the whole goal is for them to say, well, yes, of course, I would, if I was you, I would say no. That's the whole goal of justifying. And a lot of times, whatever reason that you have is something they're not going to get. They're not going to understand, like, well, that's kind of weird. That's what they're not going to think that's like, oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry about dropping the hose. We have processes for that. You know what I'm saying? They would essentially tell you that whatever concerns you have don't make sense to them, which is true. So you don't necessarily need to justify it. You can just say, no, I'd rather not do that.
Keep it simple.
Huh?
Keep it simple.
Well, yeah, and it's just like when you start the justifying thing, then it's like you're hoping that they have all the beliefs and values that you do, and they don't. And so, therefore, they're going to have a hard time really comprehending why you'd want to say something different. It makes it easier for you, I guess, simpler for you, just to be able to say no. Does that make sense to people?
Sometimes to say no or yes, like somebody say invite me for their kids' graduation party. I know that I don't have plan for that day, but I don't feel like it. But I don't want to say yes or no at that time.
So what's the motivation?
I can't say yes or no. If I say no right away, I'm like, I might disappoint her. If I say yes, I don't wanna commit myself, to that.
So that sounds like a fear-driven response, really, right? Like you're fearing the disappointment she's going to experience, right? That's kind of a fear-driven response right there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But who likes to go to a graduation party anyway?
That could be a question you would ask them back. Who would want to go to that? That would not be. Now the assessor would be like, that was not good.
Myself are invited me. I don't know if it's just because we met.
Well, I mean, I guess you would want, like, if you're going to make a request of another person, you'd want them to want to come to your thing, and if they don't want to come, you'd want them to just be okay not coming, right? That's normally a person that makes requests of others would be, I want you to do what you're wanting to do, whether it is like either you're choosing to come or not. You see what I'm saying?
So look at that situation, to be better, what should I do?
Thanks for the invitation. I'm not going to be able to make it.
Right away.
Yeah, well, if you know right away, I mean, if you know, yeah, I'm not gonna make it.
Doesn't how you feel about the other person, doesn't that enter into?
Well, we can start to talk, yeah, that's the next one,
Okay.
okay? We had to get at least to this level of self-assurance before we can go to this next one, which is self-mastery. And so you can actually choose to give to others, which means that it would cost you something, like time, resources, comfort. So going to a graduation party, you don't want to go, it costs you something, right? And so you can make the intentional choice to give, right? You can choose to give. So what that means is you're back to saying yes to something you want to say no to, or no to something you want to say yes to. And that's this whole idea of giving. Now, giving is completely different than obeying, but it looks really similar to the outside. In the case of obeying, you're saying yes because you fear something bad happening to you. In the case of giving, you'd be okay saying no to what you want to say no to, but you're going to choose to say yes because you care about the other person and somehow this is good for them and you want to do something that's good for them. All right. And the reason why I kind of bring up these different ways of responding is that, like, if we're down here in this fear-driven way of responding to people, then we actually don't have the capacity to give. We don't have that. We basically are responding out of fear to things. And just because you say yes, so for example, if Gene is taking care of a spouse, because he's afraid to say, no, I don't want to do that, out of fear of maybe, the community scorning you or something like that, then that's not really something you're giving, right? That's something that you're kind of earning other people's good impression of you, but you're not really giving anything. Do you see what I'm saying there? Does that make sense?
It's not making your heart any better.
Right, and so it can be really counterintuitive for people, especially in our Christian-driven, like we need to love each other, we need to care for each other. But if your behavior is fear-driven, then it's not really it's not one where you have the capacity to give. So what we want to do is get ourselves up at least to this level where we can say yes to the things we want to say yes to and no to the things we don't want to do. And then once we get ourselves to that point, we're self-assured, then we have this capacity now to choose self-mastery, where we give of ourselves to others.
That works when you're very, very well, I guess, when you're talking about giving to charities, giving money out to charities.
That would be an example of giving, yeah.
Well, I'm saying you get calls all the time. You get these calls on the phone all the time and people coming and requesting all the time. And if you said yes to everybody, which is what you probably would love to do if you were able, I mean, but your finances are finite.
Yeah,
or at least
somehow,
mine
yeah.
are. At least mine are.
Yeah, at least mine are.
Yeah.
Everybody's.
Yeah, but so you can't give to everybody. So you need to pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes your picking and choosing is arbitrary because in your mind, you can't give to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So under those circumstances, there are people who are driven every time somebody asks for money. Oh yeah, I'll give you this, or I'll give you that, because it never occurred to me.
You almost said it.
Yeah, it never occurred to me that they're operating out of fear.
Right. Which is they're not yet they need to get to that whole self-assurance level before they can get to the thing where you need to get to the point where you're comfortable telling people no before you can embrace you saying yes because you want to say yes.
I had an aunt that basically would drive herself to the poorhouse because anybody came to the door looking for money, she'd give it to them until she hadn't have any.
Yeah. And that could be a case of heroic virtue, or it could be a case of someone that's trying to purchase the good opinion of others. Yeah. Those are two very different scenarios.
But all the good you've done kind of flies out the window if you can't support yourself.
Yeah.
Right, because then the capacity to give kind of goes down with time.
Or somebody else is going to have to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
That you're not being a good steward of your finances.
Right.
those self-mastery, I think that's part of the growing up, I suppose, to like what Jean said, like how many of my colleagues who think they have graduations, they have babies, I can go to every one of them, because that would be can't give everybody. There are many of them.
Right. So you have limitations. You have limitations, and these are God-given limitations, right? And so what do you suppose that's telling you whenever God has limited your capacity to do these things? And you also might have limited capacity to tolerate things that are not fun for you, right? So it could be that you go to these things, it's like, my gosh, I'm either bored out of my mind or whatever it is, right? It's like, I'm not gelling, I'm not connecting with these people. This is not fun for me.
It is for me, like the example is like we have community, like say probably Bernie has one. Like, I have Indonesian communities, because we all, Indonesian come to the United States. So out of all of them, it's not all of them are connected. I can't connect to all of them, just few of them I can connect.
Mm-hmm.
And then that community is the same, like a big scale would be like the whole states or something like that. You can't connect to everyone.
That's true.
Pick and choose, and then once you are in that community, people ask you this and that, make it a bit harder. And that's I'm thinking that's part of growing up myself. For me to be able to discern, I guess, but to say yes or
right.
no.
Yeah, I mean, the first step would just be to say yes to the things you want to say yes to, and no the same things you want to say no to, and get comfortable with that. And what you'll do after you do that for a while, you'll realize, the world doesn't cave in, right? Whenever you say no, you might be scared, but when you say no to somebody, it works out just fine.
Yeah, they're okay.
Yeah, they survive. Yeah, they somehow make it. Yeah. Very good. All right, anybody else? Anything here? All right, I think we've kind of talked about that there. All right, so this is my final slide. All right. So this is I didn't know how long this would go, but it looks like we're getting close to just 1 hour instead of 1.5 hours. So, I kind of picked and chose different things to talk about because I wanted to kind of, just ball this up into one big concept, right? So you can have others, I hear that in your theme, others that kind of say, this is who you are. You are a member of the Indonesian community, and I have expectations of you, right? But God desires us to live out our call as children of God. And so the thing is, we can trust God that He has already given, and He will continue to give us the graces that we need. And what that means sometimes is that, we don't get all the graces, right? We get the graces that God says we need. We might, as a matter of fact, we might not get the graces that we always want, right? Otherwise, everybody wouldn't have parable. So we're going to get the graces that God thinks that we need, and that's it. And so those limitations tell you things, right? And we can choose, once we can choose, like, not out of fear, but we can make the choice to give to others, but also we have to take care of ourselves in that process. And if you have an internally focused assessor and an externally focused informer, then that can help guide you in the way you kind of make your decisions. Because with that combination, you're not allowing other people to tell you whether or not you're being good or not. So for example, if other people in your community are saying you're not doing your job because you didn't go to this, you didn't go to this, then that would be, and if you listen to that and say like, oh, that means I'm a bad person, then that would essentially say that you're kind of have an externally focused assessor. And that's something that's really good to change. It's really good to kind of get your assessor focused inwardly, because that's where the content is. That's where the content that says, this is what's driving my behavior. Am I behaving out of selfishness? Am I behaving out of concern for others? or am I behaving like this because I am completely tired, and if I do one more thing, I might just lose my mind here. So those are the kind of things that put it all together.
Well, a lot of this depends on the quality of your internally focused assessor. There are a lot of people who basically think they're really virtuous, and they're really not.
Yeah, and so that is a part of us that helps us grow, right? If your assessor is internally focused, it has the opportunity to grow in virtue. Where if it's externally focused, it doesn't have the opportunity to grow and develop at all, right? It's all just waiting for other people to tell you whether or not you're doing it good or not.
Well, you can still be internally focused and be wrong.
Well, for sure, yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
But you need an externally focused informer to help balance that and to grow and develop like that.
well, there are lots of people around who are what you call enablers, who will take your internally focused, screwed up picture of yourself and say, "Oh, you're just fine."
Oh, for sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So that's a circumstance that basically is out of balance completely, and yet you, as your internal assessor, thinks that you're completely in balance.
That's what
Well,
keeps him in business.
Yeah. Well, I think that so the internal, like your assessor, it should be in tune as to whether or not you're behaving out of out of selfishness or greed or caring for others. It should know what's driving you.
But what if you come across people that don't know? I mean, that, like Gene said, really think they're okay.
Well, give me like an example. I guess we'd make it easier if we had an example.
A
This is
yellow-haired
Deacon and you.
a yellow-haired president comes to mind.
Okay. And so are you under the impression that he has an internally focused assessor?
I am under the impression he's a complete narcissist.
Okay.
So
So
those you just have to take out of the mix,
the
right?
question would be, I guess we stay away from the politics. Do you have any non-political thing that you would like to put in there?
Well, not really. Nobody I can think of who behaves that way, because those are the kind of people you want to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to come up with an example. Yeah.
Well,
People
somebody
that run-
like Jeffrey Dahmer, for instance. I mean, he's perfectly all right as far as he's concerned to go out and murder people.
Right. And so you're thinking that when he looked inside himself, he's thinking this is okay.
Yeah.
So how would you come to that conclusion, I guess?
Well, obviously the guy was off his nut, but that's basically, isn't that a definition of insanity?
The definition of insanity. So
When your internally focused assessor is completely all right with.
I think that I have seen people that do bad things, but they know they're doing bad things when they do them. They do them for other. It's not like they're not doing it because they want to display virtue. They're doing it for other reasons. But people, like a lot of times, many times, people will know that what they're doing is wrong, even though they're doing it.
Well, how about, for instance, a guy who sets up a Ponzi scheme and swindles people out of millions of dollars? I mean, he obviously knows he's doing something wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And yet, his as far as he's concerned, he's doing good for himself.
Well, I guess
for a while,
it would be interesting to find out, like, what is driving people that are doing that, right?
Yeah.
Is it like the desire to grow in virtue? Is that's why they're doing this stuff, or you think there's other reasons?
A lot of people are going to love the living. While he's giving his first group of people the money back, where they're getting 50% return on investment, those people are going to love him, and maybe that's what he's looking for. Meanwhile, the people he's stealing from to give that 50% return on investment to the people who started at the beginning, etc.
So it would be like a Bernie Madoff is a real famous example of that. And so, I guess, I don't know. We'd have to really understand what is driving the people that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is it because they think they're doing right? Like they really think that, yes, this is a good thing, or is it because they enjoy they're getting some sort of, pleasure out of it,
Well, they're spending a lot of that money on themselves.
which would be probably a pleasurable experience, I'm
Yeah.
guessing. Yeah, so some people could choose to do things that they know are wrong, but they do it because it brings them pleasure.
Is that internally focused assessor? Is it more like God-given conscience? Like
I think it's God-given. Yeah, the assessor is like something he set up within us to help us, right?
yeah, we ignore those because of our sin. We ignore some of those. We know it is right. We know it's not right, but we do it anyway, and that become internally focused assessor, and then you still do it anyway.
Well, yeah, I think that, I do think that the assessor is kind of, a part of the whole plan is, how God made us. And the thing is, there's a lot of competing interests within us. And, sometimes when people are, challenged to do something good versus something bad, sometimes they choose the good, sometimes they choose the bad. Seems like there's all sorts of like TV shows where they set people up to like have a choice of doing something good or something bad, and somehow they want to see if they make the good choice or the bad choice. It's kind of drawing a blank right now on that, but it's like there's competing interests, like the benefit of stealing a lot of money and having that money for your use versus the benefit of doing something that is virtuous and is good and appropriate. There's a tension within us between doing something that's good and sometimes bad. And a lot of times, sometimes you can be holding out and do the good thing over and over again, but then at some point you grow weak and you do the bad thing, and then that's why we have confession, and then give yourself some graces so that you can go back and try to go back to doing the good things again. And I think that's why factoring back into self-care, like saying no to others so that you can take care of yourself, it's important to do that, because when you're faced with these temptations, then you'll have the opportunity to say no. But I think that the assessor would say, hey, you're not behaving with virtue when you're doing something that it knows is sinful. Anyway, well, that's all I got, guys.
Close with a prayer.
Yeah, let's do it. Forgot to open with a prayer, didn't I? All right, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, I give thanks for your many abundant blessings, the blessings to be able to come and interact with other people, talk about things that are important and vital, those things that bring about healing, growth, and connection. Ask that you guide us all as we continue to grow in virtue and to have the strength to say no to temptation and yes to loving others. Ask that you, ask that you bless us on our way here today. And we ask all this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's good.